This video is about the brain and cranial nerves. So we're going to look at some of the anatomical features of the brain and the cranial nerves. What we'll do is we'll start at the base of the brain, kind of work our way up. So the bottom of the brain consists of the brain stem. The brain stem has three major parts: the midbrain, the pons, the medulla. At the top, the most superior part of the brainstem is called the diencephalon. Di just means two. Cephala is referring to the brain. Then, slightly below that, we have the mammillary bodies, and then the pons, and then the medulla oblongata. So these are the main parts of the brainstem. The medulla, the pons, and then the top part there, that's all lumped in together as the midbrain. The brain itself is divided into major sections. Those sections are distinguished as lobes. Those lobes can be identified by some major features like grooves or folds. Right, so some of the major grooves or folds help distinguish the brain features. Whenever you're seeing something like this word, gyrus, think it's going to fold up. And then whenever the fold is down, that's the sulcus. So think of sulk, like you're sulking, you're upset. Gyrus, think of gyrating, you're excited. All right, so the fold that goes up, that's the gyrus. The fold that goes down, that's the sulcus. So this deep trench right here, that's the central sulcus. All right, so that's going to divide the brain front to back. The lateral fissure, a fissure is a really deep groove, and that's going to divide the brain left and right. So this is going to be the right hemisphere of the brain. This is the left hemisphere of the brain. This is going to be the frontal lobe, because that's in the front, just like the frontal bone. Parietal lobe, like pair of parietals. And then back here, occipital lobe, that's going to be where most of your eye information is going to go, like just like the occipital lobe, the occipital bone in the back of your brain. So in the side view, we have the central sulcus dividing it kind of front and back. Here's our pair of parietal lobe. This is our occipital lobe in the back. Here in the front is the frontal lobe. Just anterior to the central sulcus is the precentral gyrus. Gyrus going up, sulcus going down. So you're going to have this bump that goes up and this deep part that goes down and this bump that goes up. All right, so that's going to be the precentral gyrus, post-central gyrus, and then this is going to be the central sulcus, because sulcus goes down. On the side, we can see this other fold, the temporal lobe, just like your temporal bone. And then down here, we can see the brainstem. So one kind of simple way to think of it is here's the cerebrum. That's where you're going to do most of your thinking, the higher functions. Here is the cerebellum. That's your balance and coordination. And then here is your brainstem. So cerebrum, cerebellum, brainstem. So what we've looked at so far is some of these major features just to kind of get oriented. This up here, this big part here, that's your cerebrum. Right here, this kind of wrinkly part, that's your cerebellum. And then this part right here, that's your brainstem. Pons, medulla, midbrain. So this is the picture you actually have in your lab. These are the things that you're going to need to know and label. So starting here with the precentral gyrus, and then we're going to have the central sulcus, and then we're going to have the frontal lobe. Here is the temporal lobe. So temporal lobe here. This is going to be the pons here. Now down the other side, we're going to have the central gyrus. All right, so still folding up. Then we're going to have the parietal lobe, and then we have the occipital lobe, the cerebellum, the medulla, and the spinal cord. All right, so those parts will look like that. You also have a picture that looks like this. We're going to see the right and left hemispheres. So remember, you're looking down at the brain. The right side is the right hemisphere, left-hand side is the left hemisphere. The central sulcus is dividing it anterior to posterior. Post is behind it. Longitudinal fissure is the big separation between the hemispheres. This pre-central sulcus is the one that's more anterior. If I flip the brain over and I look at the bottom, all right, the bottom of the brain, I'm mostly going to see these yellow features. These yellow features are cranial nerves. Cranial nerves originate in the cranium, and then they're going to go all over the place. So cranial nerves, that's how they got their name. But some of these cranial nerves, there's 12 of them. Some of them are going to be motor nerves. That means they control muscles. Some are going to be sensory nerves. That means they have to do with the senses. And some will be both. But you can see that a lot of them branch right out of the pons, the medulla oblongata, and then some up here, more anterior and superior nerves. So you have a diagram that looks something like this, and we'll label some of these major features from the bottom view. All right, so I'm looking up at the brain. The longitudinal fissure divides it left and right. Olfactory bulb, the olfactory is going to have to do with your sense of smell. The optic chiasma, a chiasma just means it's going to crisscross. All right, so these nerves are going to make an X, like a crisscross shape. So the information coming in here is actually going to follow this track. All right, so the information coming in here is going to follow this track. All right, so chiasm just means they're going to crisscross. The mammillary bodies, again, that's part of the brainstem. Medulla oblongata, that's going to be what controls most of your autonomic nervous system, the things that happen automatically that you don't have to think about. Cerebellum for balance, your spinal cord that takes all that information to and from the brain. Your pons, pituitary gland, this is part of the endocrine system. It's a gland that is sometimes referred to as the master gland because it secretes hormones that control other glands. Then we're going to have your optic nerve, and finally your cerebrum. Looking at your brain from the side view, one of the major features that sticks out is this, the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is where the two hemispheres of your brain finally attach. So you can see how deep that longitudinal fissure is, dividing the left and right hemispheres. All this up here is cerebrum. All right, this down here, cerebellum. This right here, brainstem, midbrain here on the top of the cerebellum. These are where we can really see the gyrus. That's where they fold up, sulcus, where they fold down. Your cerebellum, its big feature is this arbor vitae, this like tree arbor, life vitae. So it looks kind of like a tree. These are the branches and the leaves. Here in the brainstem, the medulla, pons, midbrain, and then up here we have some new features, the thalamus and the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus controls the pituitary gland. That's the pituitary gland down here. The hypothalamus just above it. So that's going to be concerned with a lot of homeostasis kinds of things. Also, from the side view, we have some other features. Here you can see the fornix. That's going to connect the hippocampus, where we get a lot of our emotion and memory. We can see there's our thalamus, all right, and that's going to help direct information coming up the spinal cord to different parts of the brain. This septum pendilucium, it's a barrier between two small chambers, and these chambers are going to hold fluid, cerebrospinal fluid. So those chambers are referred to as ventricles. But this septum, a septum is a division, like the septum in your nose, for example, is a division between the sides of your nose. This septum is a division between those two chambers. You can also see here the pituitary gland, that's the master gland, and this little connection between the brain and the pituitary gland, infundibulum, is the name of that little connection. This is the picture that you're looking at to label. The fornix, the corpus callosum, that's where the brain connects. The midbrain, arbor vitae, that tree of life. Cerebellum, that controls your balance and coordination. Medulla oblongata, pons, the mammillary bodies, pituitary gland, the master gland, infundibulum, that's the little connection, the thalamus, and then below it, hypothalamus, and then the division between those two little chambers, septum pendilucium. So just to reiterate, the gyrus has to fold upward, the sulcus is to fold downward. A fissure is a really deep groove. Now, sometimes these nerve tracts connect in the same region, like the temporal lobe, let's say, or the left hemisphere, let's say. Those are association connections. Commissural connections are between the right and left hemisphere. So that's going to be mostly through the corpus callosum. And then projection tracts connect the brainstem and the spinal cord. So they're going to run from the brainstem, like the medulla, straight down to the spinal cord. Protecting your brain is a layer of connective tissue. These coverings are called meninges. If they get infected, that's called meningitis. That can be really terrible. They also separate the brain from blood. So if you have some bacteria or something in the blood, it can stay away from the brain because it's protected by these meninges. Now, there's 3 layers of these meninges. Sometimes they're called dura mater, but it's dura, and then arachnoid, and then pia. So if you see something like subdural, sub means below, dura means it's below the dura layer, hematoma in this case, a bleed on the brain. So here's those 3, the dura mater, arachnoid mater, pia mater. So think of it like they're padding your brain. It's protecting your brain. So pia is closest to the brain, then arachnoid, then dura mater. Your brain floats around in cerebrospinal fluid. That cerebrospinal fluid circulates around your brain. So here you can kind of see the route of that circulation. Here's where that septum is going to be, but that's the ventricle that's holding some of that cerebrospinal fluid. And then you can see it's just kind of following these arrows. That's going to add a lot of protection to your brain in several different ways. But the cerebrospinal fluid, it kind of floats your brain, keeps it from getting banged around and bruised very easily. But it also is providing nutrients like sugar and oxygen, taking away things like carbon dioxide and waste products. So we have a diagram to label when it comes to some of this cerebrospinal fluid. So the cerebral aqueduct, that's going to be like a little track for the fluid. Now the fourth ventricle, and as soon as you hear something like fourth ventricle, be thinking to yourself, oh, okay, there's going to be a third ventricle. Then we have the carotid plexus, the intraventricular foramen, and the lateral ventricles. So the carotid plexus, that's going to make the cerebrospinal fluid. It starts the flow at the lateral ventricles. Then it's going to move through that interventricular foramen. That's going to go to the third ventricle. The third ventricle is kind of a large chamber. It's going to move from there through the cerebral aqueduct to the fourth ventricle, which is also a large chamber. And then the circulation kind of repeats that. So if you think about these 2 ventricles here, separated by that septum as like first and second, then you can think of these as like third and fourth. These are the cranial nerves. So there's 12 cranial nerves, and there's all kinds of different mnemonics to try to remember them. The optic nerve and the olfactory nerve, that's going to be right at the top of the list. Ocular motor, trochlear, trigeminal, abducens, facial, vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, hypoglossal nerves. Here you can see the Roman numerals. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then down here is going to be 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 9. Over here's 10, and then 11, then 12. They're kind of numbered. The most anterior and superior are first. The ones that are most posterior and inferior are last. So here they are in order. 1 is the olfactory nerve, optic, ocular motor, trochlear, trigeminal, abducens, facial, vestibulocochlear. That's the vestibule of the ear and the cochlea of the ear. A glossopharyngeal, so that's your pharynx area, and glossus, that's your tongue. Vagus, accessory, hypoglossal, so under your tongue. Here they are again. Now we're looking at it from the bottom view of these pairs of cranial nerves. You can see them there. It's important to know where these are located. So understand like the diagrams and where these are located. Make sure you can label and relabel so you know where they are, what they look like. So that if you have a question that's pointing to one of these, like this one, let's say, you're like, oh, that's the trigeminal nerve. All right, there's lots of mnemonic to help remember these. So for example, one mnemonic is old Opie's organic tropical treats are fruits and vegetables. Good vitamins always help. And the reason that's kind of helpful is you've got these OOOs beginning. Old and olfactory are close. Opie and optic, 2 letters. Organic and ocular motor. Tropical with the TRO, and treats are fruits and vegetables. Good vitamins always help. So some of those like double letters can help with some of these. If you find a different mnemonic that you like better, I have a little artwork video that I like to use to help me remember what they are, as well as what they do. So again, there's lots of mnemonics to help remember which ones are sensory, which ones are motor, which ones are both. So there's a mnemonic that goes, some say marry money, but my brother says being beautiful matters more. And that just corresponds to some say marry money, but my brother says beautiful matters more. So the M stands for motor, the S stands for sensory, the B stands for both, carrying both sensory and motor functions. So that can help you remember those. But do pay close attention to where they are as well as what they do. So practice labeling that diagram so that you're familiar with it.